devotions. This week we're going to continue our series on logic to equip you how to think well. And if you remember from last week, we talked about arguments and the three parts of an argument, two premises and one conclusion. And today we're going to talk about what makes a sound argument. There are three characteristics. First, it must have unambiguous words, or that means the words are clear, they are not ambiguous. Later on, we will go into that. Second, it must have valid logic. Third, it must have true premises that accurately reflect reality. Let's look at examples. First, it must have unambiguous words. Take a look at this argument. Premise 1, a plane is a carpenter's tool. Premise 2, the Boeing 747 is a plane. Conclusion, therefore, the Boeing 747 is a carpenter's tool. Does that sound right? Of course not. Why? Because the word plane is ambiguous, meaning it's one word with two different meanings. The first, the plane being a carpenter's tool in premise 1. Second premise is the plane as in the airplane, the Boeing 747. Now, one word with two different meanings used as two premises to support one conclusion. Therefore, your argument cannot stand because your words are ambiguous. So therefore, in order to have a sound argument, you must use unambiguous words, very clear, very precise, referring only to one thing. From the third characteristics, it must have true premises that reflect reality. Take a look at this argument. Premise 1, I only ate the broken biscuits. Premise 2, broken biscuits contain no calories. Conclusion, therefore, I ate no calories. That doesn't sound right. Why? Because premise 1, I only ate the broken biscuits, is okay, not arguable. But premise 2, broken biscuits contain no calories. If you know this from your science or from your health, all foods, they have calories because it's a measure of energy. There is no way that biscuits, no matter how broken they are, would contain no calories, because your premise 2 is not true, it's not correct, it's not reflecting reality. Therefore, the conclusion that will come out of these two premises will not stand. It's not a sound argument. Let's take a look at the second characteristics. It must have valid logic. What does that mean? We mentioned last week that logic is the math of life. It's what we use to understand what is common sense, what is not contradicting. So let's take a look at this argument. Premise 1, high-fat foods are bad for you. Premise 2, some yogurt is high in fat. Conclusion, therefore, all yogurt is bad for you. What's wrong with that? Because the logic is not valid. Premise 1 says high-fat foods are bad for you. So, okay. Premise 2 says some yogurt is high in fat. Only some. Yet, therefore, all yogurt is bad for you. There is no proper logic supporting that your premise 2 only says some, but you went ahead and concluded that all yogurt is bad. Your reasons cannot support your conclusion. Your premises cannot support your conclusion. Therefore, it is unsound argument. Logic must be valid. And because we're going to talk about logical fallacy, we're going to learn more about what makes a logic valid. And we have to expose the errors in our everyday thinking. So this is part 1 of our logical fallacies. I will teach you about one logical fallacy for today. This is ad hominem fallacy. Ad hominem is Latin for against the person or against the man. So this fallacy attempts to undermine the truth of an idea by attacking the person who's proposing the idea. Example 1. Don't believe him. He's stupid. Only uneducated people believe that. So the character of the person was attacked. It was asserted, and only an assertion, that that person, he is stupid, quote unquote. Only uneducated people believe that because no one wants to be called uneducated. No one wants to be associated with that, quote unquote, stupid person. Then therefore, this fallacy is being passed on as logical, even though it's not. It's ad hominem. Second, that book was written by a left-wing hippie. You can't possibly take those ideas seriously. Again, the character of the author was attacked. He was called a left-wing hippie. Therefore, anyone who doesn't want to be called that will not take the ideas of that book or that person seriously. Another example. This is from the Bible. Here is a glutton and a drunkard, a friend of tax collectors and sinners. Now, this ad hominem logical fallacy was used by the Pharisees against Jesus. He was labeled as a glutton and a drunkard. That assertion is only based on the fact that Jesus drinks and eats with people. He's just hanging out with people, and of course, when you're hanging out with people, you eat and drink with them. But they exaggerated things and went on to assert that Jesus is a glutton and a drunkard. And because of that, they passed on as logical the idea that because he is a friend of tax collectors and sinners, another attack on his character, therefore no one should want to follow him, no one should believe him, no one should associate themselves with him. Does this work? No, of course not, because this is a logical fallacy. This is ad hominem. Now, in our day and time, we call this character assassination. We try to undermine the characteristics of a person so that anything that the person will say will be considered as wrong or bad simply because we label the person as bad. If you check the history, check the books, 2,000 years, no one would say that Jesus is a bad teacher. And simply because the Pharisees called him a bad person, they're thinking that this kind of thought would actually lead people to believe that he is teaching bad things. But if you look at his teachings, it has proper merits. Now, logical fallacy, this exposes the reality that sometimes we think that just because the source is bad, everything that comes out of it is bad. Now, if you think about it, we are all sinners, right? That's a biblical truth. But that doesn't mean that everything we do is a sin. A liar, for example, may be labeled as a liar, but that doesn't mean that everything the person will say is a lie, right? So that's what happens, for example, in court when there are witnesses or whistleblowers against high-profile people, against politicians. They will just say, oh, this witness is a liar. You can't believe everything or anything that he says. But what if, even though that's a liar, he or she witnessed a crime happen, and whatever he or she is saying is true? Now, but because of this logical fallacy, some people will not even consider the words of that person as reliable. Even though there is some merits in that, we have to examine ideas, the arguments, based on the merits of the statement, not only because of who is the person or what kind of person is saying those things. Even though, for example, a person did not go to school, that doesn't mean that the person cannot make good decisions in business, cannot make good decisions in life. Because we cannot attack that person and assume that that person will never come up with anything good. And that's exactly what people did against Jesus. And for all I know, maybe you've experienced something like that. I have experienced something like this in the past. And it would be good for us to examine the merits of statements, of arguments, based on the arguments themselves, based on their logic, based on the validity of the logic, not just because of who the person is or what the person is. We must not judge people based on what they are and always assume that they will never become right, because in God's kingdom, He always gives second chances. And for all you know, the past, that everything that the person has done has been left behind, and the person is already turning a new leaf.